So, what's the one thing, the single thing you can do that will solve your biggest, most tangled up problem? Well, according to the legendary strategist Richard Rumelt, every complex challenge has something he calls a crux. It's a single critical point of leverage. If you can find it, you unlock real progress. But if you ignore it, you just end up spinning your wheels. So let's figure out how to spot it.
Now, to really get this, we're not starting in a boardroom. Nope. We're actually going to a forest. Specifically, Fontainebleau Forest in France.
And in that forest, we're looking at this, a world-famous bouldering problem with a very memorable name. It's called Le Toit du cul de chien, which translates to the roof of the dog's ass. Seriously. And trust me, it's famous for a very good reason.
Yeah, this thing is an absolute beast. You're looking at a 12-foot smooth face with a 4-foot overhang sticking out at the top. Rumel talks about watching these incredibly strong climbers. We're talking people who can do one-armed pull-ups. Just try and fail. Over and over. They slide right back down to the ground. Because see, all the strength, all the ambition in the world, it doesn't matter one bit if you can't solve that overhang. That overhang right there, that's the crux of the climb.
Okay, so how on earth does a boulder in France connect to, say, business strategy? It's a fair question. Well, this is where Rummel had this kind of epiphany. He was talking to other climbers, and he realized they weren't just throwing themselves at any random rock they could find.
No, they were strategic. They chose climbs where they genuinely believed they could solve the hardest part, the crux. And it was like a light bulb went off for Rumelt. He realized that's exactly what the most effective leaders do. They don't just set some vague goal. They diagnose the single most critical and, this is key, the most addressable part of a challenge, and then they focus all their energy right there.
And you know, this is where this whole idea just cuts right through all that corporate fluff we're so used to. Real strategy, it's not about crafting the perfect vision statement. It's not about setting arbitrary goals like, let's increase profits by 15%. Rumelt says that's just wishful thinking. Real strategy is a simple two-step process. First, diagnose the crux. And second, design a coherent, logical set of actions to overcome that crux. That's it.
So let's nail down this definition, because it's the crux of the whole idea. The crux isn't just the most important part of a challenge. It has to be addressable too. It's the intersection of those two things. Think about it. If something's important but you can't do anything about it, that's just a gnarly problem you have to live with for now. And if something's addressable but not important, that's just a minor task, a distraction. It has to be both, important and addressable. That's where you find your leverage.
All right, so this all sounds great in theory, right? But does it actually work in the messy real world? Let's look at a couple of absolute giants who found their crux and unlocked some truly massive success because of it.
Okay, let's take Netflix. Rewind to 2018. The infamous content war was on the horizon. Disney, all the big studios, they were getting ready to pull their shows and movies to launch their own streaming services. This was a huge, huge challenge for Netflix. So what did they do? Well, instead of just trying to out-Hollywood, they identified their crux, their international head start. The coherent action that followed, they decided to become a global engine for creating and distributing foreign content, something their US-focused rivals just couldn't match. Or think about Marvel. After they licensed away their biggest stars, Spider-Man, the X-Man, they were left with what everyone considered B-list heroes. The crux for them wasn't, how do we make one hero popular? It was, how do we make the entire group of these leftover characters valuable all at once? And the answer? The brilliant strategic move wasn't a single movie. It was the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
You see what happened there? That is the power of diagnosis in action. Both of these companies, they were facing what looked like an overwhelming, tangled mess of problems. But by finding and focusing on that one single solvable crux, they transformed the whole situation into a focused, winnable challenge.
So, this brings up a big question, right? If finding the crux is so powerful, why doesn't everybody do it? Well, it turns out it's incredibly easy to fall into a few really common traps.
You know, a lot of leaders, and Rumel tells this great story about an executive he calls Carolyn. They're looking for a formula, a strategy calculator that you can just punch numbers into and get an answer. It doesn't exist. They're asking for a simple roadmap to hit a goal that someone else just handed down to them, and they're completely skipping the hard work of actually diagnosing the problem.
And that leads us right into trap number 1, starting with an arbitrary goal. Something like, we need 15% annual profit growth. Look, that's not a strategy. It's just a demand that's completely disconnected from reality. It assumes that someone, somewhere, already knows how to deal with all the challenges. It's exactly like standing at the bottom of that boulder in France and telling the climbers, hey, just get to the top, while totally ignoring the giant overhang.
And that flows right into the second big trap, confusing management with strategy. They are not the same thing. Managing is about keeping things running. It's about measuring progress on a path you're already on. Hitting your KPIs, executing the plan. Strategy, that's the really hard, creative work of figuring out what the path should even be in the first place.
And the cost of getting this wrong, of confusing management with strategy, it can be absolutely tragic. This number, 124, that's the number of deaths linked to the General Motors ignition switch failure. And this wasn't just some small technical problem. It was a catastrophic failure of strategy. For years, the company failed to diagnose the true crux of the problem, which was that a single, cheap, faulty switch was disabling airbags in their cars. They focused on all these other disconnected issues, never seeing that one critical point of failure, until it was far, far too late.
Okay, so how can you avoid these traps? How do you actually find the crux of your own challenges, whether it's at work or in your life? Well, there's a practical process you can follow.
It really boils down to 4 steps. Step 1, just brainstorm. Get it all out. List all the challenges you're facing, big and small. Step 2, for each one of those challenges, question your own assumptions about it. Really poke at it. Step 3, and this is the absolute key moment, you have to isolate the challenges that are both critical and addressable. That's your hunt for the crux. And finally, step 4, design a coherent set of actions to overcome that one single point.
And this matrix right here is the perfect tool for that third step. You can literally plot out all your challenges. Look, in the top left, you've got things that are highly important, but you can't really do anything about them right now. Those are your gnarly challenges. You might just have to work around them. Bottom right, you've got stuff that's easy to address but not very important. Those are just minor tasks or worse distractions. But that top right quadrant, the sweet spot, high importance and high addressability, that is your target. That is the crux.
And please, remember this. The goal here isn't to create some perfect 10-year plan that predicts the future. That's impossible. It's about finding that single point of leverage and designing a coherent action that creates meaningful progress right now. It's all about building momentum.
Look, we all face these gnarly challenges in our jobs, in our lives. These tangled messes that just feel completely overwhelming. But somewhere inside that mess, there is a single point of leverage, a crux, just waiting for you to find it. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. What is the crux that you've been ignoring?